I'm Riley. I love movies, so let's talk Ford versus Ferrari. I saw the trailer and I was intrigued. I was excited. I thought, like probably many of you, it's literally going to be about Ford versus Ferrari, and it is. But at the core, it's the relationship. It's a friendship, you know, and between Matt Damon's character, who is named Carroll Shelby, and Christian Bale's character, whose name is Ken Miles. So it's about them working together with Ford versus Ferrari. So that's where that part comes in, and yes, it is about the big race at the end, the Le Mans 24-hour race, and so it is also about Ferrari, but it really focuses on like their friendship and kind of how they work versus almost like Ford at sometimes, and then how they sort of eventually like come together to be versus Ferrari. So you have Carroll Shelby, who's Matt Damon's character. He's got the twang, he's like a cowboy, he's the American, like kind of all-around good boy. He's a car salesman and he used to race, and I show that in the beginning. And then you have Christian Bale's character, who, as I said, is named Ken Miles. He's a World War II vet, and he's just like a huge daredevil type personality, and I think this might have been like an acting choice, but he's a little twitchy and kind of like hunches over a lot. And I don't know, Christian Bale is known for like weird, well not weird, but like interesting and weird acting choices sometimes, so that was a little distracting maybe sometimes. I'm not sure, it's just maybe the real Ken Miles was like that, but watching Christian Bale do that was a little like it was one of the small things that irked me throughout this movie, because it's just, like I said, an acting choice and some people might like it, but he just was super jerky like this sometimes, and you're just kind of going, what, is that necessary? Like it pulls your focus from what you should be watching, because like I said, I'm noticing that versus being in the moment. I know a movie's good, like truly amazingly good, when I am in the moment, and little things like that, even if it is an acting choice, don't bother me. Like I don't notice them as much. And then you had, I'm gonna say it wrong, I think it's Caitriona Balfe. She's from The Outlander, and she plays Ken Miles, Christian Bale's wife, Molly, and she is kind of this like badass person for him, but she's so underused in this movie, and I know and understand it's not necessarily about her, but she is part of his life. Like she's the one that helps like encourage him to race. Like she doesn't want him to lie about it, because she's into cars too, but she just wants to be part of it. She wants to know what he's doing, if he's gonna do it, because that's his, like, it's in his blood. Racing is in his blood. He likes the adrenaline rush, and he talks about the perfect lap and all those kinds of things, and she's also a good driver. Like she understands that, but she's just underused a lot in this movie. And another character that I felt was underused was John Bernthal's character. He is a Ford executive. He's the one that like brings the idea to Henry Ford II, who's the head of Ford Motors right now, about how they were first trying to buy Ferrari, because in the beginning, spoilers, you'll see that both Ford Motors and Ferrari are kind of going out of business a little bit, and then Ford gets sent over per John's character, whose name is Lee. He goes over there to make a deal with Ferrari, and that's when this whole thing starts, because Ferrari's like, no, you guys make ugly cars, your head of thing is, your head of Ford II, you know, Henry Ford II, is not his dad, basically. He makes ugly cars, he's not a good decision maker, and those kinds of things, and that's what spurs this whole, well, we're gonna make the best car. And that's, you see his character, and he pops up every now and then. He's supposed to be the liaison between Carroll Shelby and Ford, but then he kind of gets pushed back for Josh Lucas's character, who comes in, whose name is Lee, BB, I don't know, his name's Lee, and he, to me, was like the villain, if you could say. He's like always sneaky and undermining. He's the VP of Ford, so he does help make all the big decisions, because you know the main guy usually just signs stuff off, and that's kind of what they show you in this movie, is that he didn't get along well with Christian Bale's character, Ken, because Ken is very hot-headed, abrupt. He's definitely not a people person, and that is made very clear throughout the whole movie. Like he throws a wrench at his friend Carol Shelby, you know, in the movie, and like that's just part of their relationship. But that's why he can't ever get as far with his racing, because he's such a hothead. Like he doesn't know how to deal with people, and he gets on the wrong foot with the Ford VP, which is through the rest of the movie is constantly being like, I don't want him to race our cars. He's not the good old boy that everyone wants to see. He's not the poster boy image that Ford wants to have when they win with this race car. And Carol Shelby's always like, well, it's not just about throwing money at something. Like, you need someone who truly understands how to race, and that is Ken's character. Like, that's what he is. Like, he's born to race. Like, and then, you know, the movie, then they talk about the cars and they're building everything. It's all that car jargon that like some people might recognize, but someone for me who like enjoys car movies, I don't know anything what they're talking about. Like they kind of try to show you at the same time, which I appreciated. Like they talk about the gearbox not working and they kind of go over that part, so I understand what's happening. But as a not a car buff, like some of the stuff they talked about totally went over my head, which is fine because I understand in certain movies. But like if you're into cars, you might enjoy that because they really focus in. Like he's one type of person, Christian Bale's character Ken, he gets in the car and he just can drive it, and they show you this. He drives the car at the speeds he's supposed to be racing, and he can just feel what's wrong. Like he knows what's wrong and he knows what needs to get fixed. He might not be able to do all the fixing because he is a mechanic, but they do have a team of people that also help him. But it's just one of those things that some people have and some people don't, and that's what Shelby's always trying to tell the Lee character. And Lee's always like, well, I don't want him. And he convinces Henry Ford too, like, we don't want him and all this kind of stuff. And then you see Shelby talk to Ken a couple times being like, they don't want you, like, I'm sorry, man. And then of course, you see that fight scene that's in the trailer where he comes back to get him. It's like, I convinced them for you. And then that was a cool little moment where they're brothers. Like, that's what they seem like. They're really close friendship, and they're like brothers, you know, because they've both fought in a war and they've both gotten through it and all this kind of stuff. And then they always end up making up because Carol Shelby also knows, he's got that instinctual thing about driving and being a race car. Like the film opens with him driving the Le Mans and winning the 24-hour Le Mans, the first person to beat Ferrari, you know, the first American. But he can't do it anymore. Like he has to step back because he's got a bad heart, and like he can fall asleep at the wheel, or like the blood pressure becomes too much, and that's him. Like he's upset, but so he lives his dream basically through this by helping Ford build the car, you know, build the car that's gonna beat Ferrari. And then Ken also helps that. But now Ken is driving, and you see when Ken is like lapping, you see Shelby watching. He's like, not yet, not yet, not yet. And at the same time, you see him, you know, going by, and then as soon as he says now, you see Ken Miles, like hit what he's talking about. So you can tell they both instinctually know that as a race driver. And then to convince Henry Ford too, because Lucas's character Lee just hates him at this point. Like he wants to win. That's why I say like he's the villain. Like even though he is also part of Ford, I don't think he's used to ever losing because he's so high up on the food chain type situation. Like he always has to be right. So he convinces the Henry Ford too, who's in charge of all of Ford, like he's going to be in charge of this project. He said fine, and then he goes to Shelby and goes, I don't want him driving in Le Mans. And then so Shelby locks him in the office, which pisses him off even more, and takes Henry Ford too on a car ride, like a race car ride, and they're spinning around like crazy. And then he's like basically crying, and he's like, well, I told him, and he's like, just let Ken drive. If Ken wins Daytona, he can race in Le Mans. And then of course he wins in Daytona. They make a few tweaks to the car, and then they end up in Le Mans. And that's when, like, even to this point, like, Lee's character is so, I hate the word villain because it's not villain, he's just petty. He's being very petty. You know, he does things where he'll sabotage his own team, his own Ford team, because he wants to be right. He wants to be win. He doesn't think Ken is the American boy status, which he's correct. Like he's not really a nice person. You see throughout this whole movie, he's a little bit selfish. Like it's all about him, what he wants, because he just wants to drive. He wants to drive the perfect lap. And then they end up at Le Mans, and then they're winning, and then, well, you know, of course, there's some other things going on, and then Ferrari ends up getting out, and then the lead character was like, convinces Henry Ford too, it'll be super cool if like Ford, because now Ford's in the lead for the first, second, and third car, if they all cross the finish line together. So when Shelby tells that to Ken's character, he's like, what? Because at this point he's 4 minutes ahead, and in racing, like, that's a huge like lead, you know? There's like almost no way anyone's gonna catch up to you at that point, like, unless they're just as amazing drivers he is, and at that point he was like, it was him and the Ferrari guy pretty much. And then you have them in this tight moment and he has to make this decision, so he does another lap, which he gets to have his perfect lap, and he's so happy, like he's singing a happy song. And then at the same time he starts to think, and he's like, this guy's, they don't tell you this, but you can see like in his brain, like he's beaten his own record twice in Le Mans at the same time, you know? And so he does slow down, and this is where Lee's character, the VP of Ford, totally screws him, because this was his idea. They all crossed the finish line together, but by some really ridiculous technicality, you know, even though they were all together, and it looked to me like Miles' car was like in the lead and the other two were flanking him a little bit, but they said the guy on the right, they never mentioned his name, wins, but by some technicality, because he came from further back and all kinds of stuff, because they were all tied. So in reality, he doesn't win Le Mans. Like, Ford does win Le Mans, right? Because they had all three cars cross the finish line together. But Ken Miles' character doesn't win Le Mans. He's second place. But then, of course, he's okay with it, because the Enzo Ferrari guy who, like, kind of started this whole thing is watching this whole thing, and he, like, nods his head to him, being like, yes, you were the better racer, I acknowledge you. And then he walks off with Shelby. And so you're kind of sitting there, and you're like, I just watched this whole movie. Like, I get it, but at the same time, I just felt slight disappointment, and I know that's probably, like, the real story. But at the same time, I was just like, but why? Because he held himself back so they could all cross the finish line. He, at the end, I guess, is his character-defining moment where he decides, I found my perfect lap, I did the thing, I will become a team player now and hold myself back, and we will all cross the finish line together. So, I mean, like, yes, that did happen, and, like, yes, it was an interesting moment in the film, but at the same time, like, I was, like, still being like, no, like, you've been selfish this whole time, like, still be selfish, like, I want you to win, you know, and that's the kind of thing where I know it was a good movie, because I'm on the edge of my seat going, like, please win, you know, type situation. And then, of course, like, he's still part of Ford, which is interesting to me, that they've been, like, knocking him down this whole time, and he still wants to be part, I think he just loves the car, like I said, Ken Miles' character just loves the racing part of it and like fixing and designing, because he's also a mechanic, you know? So he's testing a new one out at the end and he crashes and he dies. So you have Shelby like not knowing what to do like 6 months later, and then he visits the family, and then he's still working for Ford, I guess. Like, that was a little bit a part of me that I didn't understand, but it's like all this crazy stuff and you're focusing on their friendship, and he didn't really know how to like move on from him dying, and then he still is working for Ford, and then they win the next 4 or 5 years, you know how they say that in the credits, and then they show the black and white photo of them at Le Mans. So all in all, it was a really good movie. It was 2.5 hours long, but didn't feel like it to me. For the most part, like, I was really into it. There's just little things, like I said, where I'm being really nitpicky now, where Christian Bale's performance with the twitchiness and just his overall character and like the way it ended, which I know is probably true to the story, but at the same time, I don't know, I would have wanted a different ending, but I know with these kinds of stories you can't really have a different ending because it's a true story or loosely based off a true story. So I'd have to research that, but other than that, like, I definitely enjoyed it. I didn't feel the length of it, so I think it's worth a see. Bye!